This is me. Yep, I'm guessing my mum took this photo. All of these envelopes are from my parents. I was visiting them a couple weeks ago and I asked my mum if she knows if she has any negatives stored away somewhere in some cupboard, and she was certain that she still has some. And so she went for a look and then came back to me with a box full of these envelopes, some of which contained some old prints and a lot, as you can see, which contained original negatives from back in the days when my parents used to shoot film. I, of course, got very excited, and so I asked my mum if I can borrow these for a week or two to scan them. And so the envelopes came with me, and for the next week or so, my scanning setup was occupying the dining table, and I spent some time each day scanning and scanning until I had scanned all the photos that I thought looked interesting on the negative. I didn't scan all of them, but still this resulted in a total of about 500 photos. So, the reason I'm doing this can be explained in 2 points. The first one is quite simple and was probably obvious from the start. Of course, it's always a delight to look back at these old photos and just wallow in nostalgia until it begins to become painful. But I've seen a lot of these photos on the walls at home, but just as many I have never seen before, and that brings me to my second point. It's fascinating. I feel a certain fascination for photographs that have happened close to my life, such as photos that my family shot. I think maybe part of the fascination with these photos is as well that by scanning them, I feel like they are in part mine because I brought them to their final form. However, I had no control over the process of actually taking the picture. And so while scanning, I found a bunch of mediocre photos, but every time I found one that was really good, I felt like I struck gold. Good in this sense doesn't particularly mean a well-composed or a well-lit photo though. While photography as an art form can be a lot about composition and similar aspects, the essence and appeal of photography is still the capturing of a moment in time. As Susan Sontag put it precisely, photographs are a way of imprisoning reality. One can't possess reality, one can possess images. One can't possess the present, but one can possess the past. And so there are many photographs among this collection that might not have the technical appeal, but they certainly intrigue me in a core photographic way. Therefore, I did my best to compress the collection to a small series that I want to present to you in this video. So this here is simply an appreciation of film photography as a medium, but also I guess it's sort of a review of my parents' photography. Enjoy. Let's start off with this photograph here of my dad and me on the field, and he is showing me how to fly a kite. And apart from the fact that this photo is super cute, I think photographically speaking it is actually pretty nicely composed. I really like the sort of 3-point composition going on here of my dad, me, and the kite. We've got these 3 objects that you recognize as the subject, and I think that adds to this overall rather wide and simple landscape frame that you have. It adds 3 subjects that you can look at and concentrate on, and I think that really gives this composition a composition, you know? It's not just a random shot, just a snapshot. I think it actually has a composition. I just love the height of the kite, that it is right where it is. I think it feels very balanced. And the layers in this composition really add some depth to it, because I can imagine that if the kite, my dad and I weren't there, it would feel quite flat maybe. But now with us in the foreground and then the houses and the mountains and the clouds, we've got 4 layers which then create a sense of depth that you can feel the 3-dimensionality in this 2-dimensional image, which always is a nice effect in photography. It's not something that you need to like have a good photo. Very 2-dimensional looking photos can be really interesting as well, but when photographs have some depth, I really like it. And the last point I want to mention about this picture is just the colors, that they look fantastic. I think the green of the field, I mean, it's very saturated, but I think it's beautiful. Then let's continue on this next page, which is the first page with 2 photos. These 2, I believe, are from probably a visit to my granny's in Japan. At least I'm pretty sure that these photos are both in Japan. And we were just visiting all sorts of places, apparently. I don't remember, obviously. And in the left photo, it seems that we were checking out some lake in the morning, I suppose. At least the light looks like morning light. And I think that is a part of what I like about the picture. It looks very bright, but in a good way. It's not this midday sun that is just coming from the top. It's still slightly sideways, which, as you know, sunset and sunrise light always looks good. And this isn't sunrise light, but it is still more or less sideways. And I think the way that my dad looks at the camera over his shoulder and the light then hits his face, it looks quite cool, even though it is wildly overexposed, I believe. I think his cheeks don't have any detail left, but that doesn't really matter, I think. And overall, just the composition here really flows very nicely, I think. I like the content, first of all, of what you can see in the photograph. My dad sitting on this rock, which just makes for a nice subject, I think. Because if he'd just be standing there, I think it'd be a bit boring, but the way that he's sitting on this rock, it just gives the photo a different feeling. And then me in that buggy in the middle just sleeping away is also quite nice. And something that I find my eye always catching when I look at this photo is that island on the right side in the back. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I wouldn't say that it's distracting. I just find that it adds some more interest to the photograph, and so I think this is a decent photo that is worth showing, just like the one on the right, which I mainly wanted to include just because I love the mood, actually, with the haze and how all this depth is added to the photograph, because with each layer you're further behind, it becomes hazier, and in the end you just have that white horizon where you don't see anything. And so the composition isn't special, but I wanted to include it just for the mood because, I mean, you know, foggy photos. I love foggy photos, and this isn't really foggy, but it's still a bit hazy, and I think it was a cool look, and it really suited to be on one page with the left photo, I think, because the left photo also has a little bit of haze in the background. Then let's continue with this standalone landscape photo, which I believe is from Patagonia, which is, I believe, in Chile, if I'm not mistaken. My grandmother, my British grandmother, used to live there, and I know that we visited her when I was small, when I was tiny. At that time, my parents were still shooting film, and that's this photo here. I think it's a beautiful landscape. I love the mountains, and I'm not sure if there's some lake or something, or maybe it's just an open wide space in between the mountain and where the person shooting the photo is standing. I think the composition is pretty decent, but maybe if the person just would have gone a couple meters to the front to those bushes, I can imagine that those would have been a nice foreground, and then you wouldn't have this negative space at the bottom that doesn't really have any purpose in this photo. But I still wanted to include it because I rarely saw these just pure landscapes. There were, of course, lots of photos of me because they're like, oh, our child. You know, parents photographing their children, and of course a lot of photos of other people from our family or friends that we were visiting. And so it was quite special to find a landscape here and there, and this is one of the landscapes that I think turned out really nicely. I really like the light, how it's coming from that top leftish area. At least that's where the photo becomes quite bright, and I think it's a pretty decent photo, so I thought it's worth including in this series. Then let's continue with 2 wonderful photos from this series. On the left is a simple portrait of my granddad and me. That's my Japanese grandfather, and I was in his arms, and I guess my grandmother or maybe my mum were just wanting to take a portrait of us too. And I think they chose a great location. I love that they went down to these gardens where there are all sorts of flowers and stuff growing. And I think it's really nice. Something you might notice is that this is not a 3:2 aspect ratio as normal 35mm film usually is. I cropped it a bit because these photos often, as said, the composition was quite random, and so I did a little fixing here and there, and then sometimes I'd crop the photo a little, and I think the 4:5 aspect ratio really fits this photo. I love the proportions of this photo now, of the grass at the bottom, then the buildings at the back, and then the sky. And I think overall this photo is a really nice shot of the 2 of us. Something that is annoying me in the composition side of this photo is that there's that electric pole that is right behind my granddad, so it's growing out of his head, which is, well, often happens and always looks a bit strange. But apart from that, I really like the distance that they chose here, that it's far away, so that you have a very environmental portrait actually with the houses and just the area in the photo as well, but not at so far away that you wouldn't consider it a portrait. I would still consider this a portrait. It's close enough. And so I think this is a really nice shot. And then the right photo I really love for the randomness and how much is going on in this photo. So disclaimer, I have no idea who these people are. There are 4 kids in this photo. I don't know if one of them is me. If, then probably the child in the middle on the tree, but I don't know if that is me. This could also just be the kids of a family that we were visiting, some friends of my parents or so. But I have no idea who they are, but I found this photo and I just loved it. I love the setting in this garden. It looks like a backyard of someone's, and this tree with kids trying to climb it, and then this one kid in the foreground pushing it. What is that? It's I mean, it's just a toy push car kind of thing. But I just love how random this photo is, because, you know, children are always funny subjects in that sense that they, you know, do really random stuff. Children can be very entertaining because of their absolute randomness and irrationality. And I think this photo shows this very nicely. You've got a child in the foreground pushing its toy, then behind it you've got this child hugging the tree. Above is a child trying to climb up to where the other child is already sitting. And so there's just a lot going on with this photo, and I think that's what I like it for, because that's what makes it not boring, I suppose. And the setting also offers a lot of details to look at. So I think this photo is just a nice combination of lots of stuff and some interesting subjects that are really nice to look at. And also the colors again are looking great. Then let's continue on this page with these 2 photos, which are also both in Japan, but at a different time. I don't know when the right photo was taken, but the left photo you can obviously see I wasn't as much of a baby anymore. I was a small child. And so this must have been a couple years later, maybe 2003, 2004, sometime around then. And in the left photo, I believe this is some sort of a amusement park, and my mum and I were riding this what is that? It looks like an ambulance, and I just saw this photo and thought this is again such a random photo, because it looks like we are there alone, because there's nothing in the background. There's just this huge space of concrete where you can supposedly drive this thing, but there's no one there. It's just my mum and me riding it here. But also the photo, because it's so bright, the shutter speed was so high that the photo looks so still, motionless, and so it just kind of doesn't fit, but in a good way, you know? It makes it funny, it makes it humorous in a way. And so I just wanted to include this photo because I like it for its, I guess it's the randomness again, but in a comical way. It's just kind of funny, the photo. And then the right one is actually quite similar in the sense that, again, it's just so random. I have no idea what is going on here. It looks like there was some street entertainer maybe, and my dad was interacting with that guy wearing 3 hats or so, I'm not sure. But something else that really makes me like this photo actually is the lighting and the colors, because I think this sunny, warm feeling that this photo emits also evokes this sense of a day out exploring some little town on the countryside or so. Something that would sound very much like something that my parents were doing with me at that time. And this a day out exploring kind of vibe really is emitted from this photograph, which I think is quite pleasant. Then it's time for a strong change in mood. This photo I love for this dark, moody look that was photographed here. I often find it difficult to photograph with film these kind of situations when it's actually too dark, but you just want to capture this darkness actually. I find it really hard. I don't know what happened here that it actually worked, but it looks wonderful. I love that in the back you can see this soft light from probably right after sunset. It looks kind of wintry, I think, like winter just after sunset, and that soft light is coming in, just adding a little bit of light into this room. And then in the middle, in the shadows, you can see 2 faces, just very faintly. It's really, they're not bright at all, and that is my mum and me, just making a portrait, I suppose. Maybe my mum was trying to do a self-portrait and forgot to activate the flash, I don't know. The photo is extremely dark, but I think that is actually what makes it interesting. I just love the true mood that is created here, this dark mood. And do you know these photos, a dark, wintry, moody day at home kind of vibe in photographs? I think that is always quite intriguing because, I mean, I spend a lot of time at home. I really like to be at home. and I really like it when you make yourself cozy inside while outside is actually quite moody, so in the winter here in Austria. And I think this photo really evokes that in a very pleasing way. Then let's continue with these two photos, which I just love because I think they are just funny. Let's start with the left photo, which, as you can see, compositionally speaking, is kind of strange because it's not straight, obviously, and I told you that I sometimes straighten the photos or fix things like the crop, but here I left it just as it is because I think it's perfect, even though I'm pretty sure it was not on purpose and that this was just a coincidence. But the tilted look of the horizon just is the perfect tilt, as if we were tilting with the child on the right. The two children, by the way, on the left, that is me, and on the right, that is probably some friend of mine from back then, but I have no idea who that is. But yeah, back to the composition. I just love how coincidentally this tilt fits this photo perfectly. It's like a metaphor for the toddlers as the subject, and the toddlers are about to like fall over, and that's exactly what the composition looks like here. Also, I love how my movement in the photo also looks like I'm about to fall over. It's just, yeah, you know, toddlers, that's what toddlers are like. And I think this is a wonderful picture of two toddlers. And then on the right side, this is more of a neutral portrait of the two of us. But despite its neutrality, something I really love here is how serious the two of us look. So the child on the right just completely seems to be unaware of the camera. It's just looking somewhere. It just doesn't care. And then there's me. I mean, look at my face. I don't know, I get an album cover kind of vibes from this photo. So I think these two as a pair obviously go together very nicely, seeing as they were probably just taken minutes apart. And I think these two have different vibes, but they fit together very nicely. Then let's continue with this photo here of my mum and me at my grandmother's place, my Japanese grandmother. So this is where my mum grew up, and in the background you can just see my grandmother. Just a little bit of her face. I really love this photo. I think it feels very intimate. I just love how my mum is looking at me in this photo really close. It really has this mother and son kind of protective vibe, you know? I don't know, it feels very intimate and very loving, and I just love it for that. And also, apart from that, on a technical side, I think the lighting is pretty cool actually, because obviously it's in the day, as you can see in the background, it's quite bright actually, but with the flash, the foreground is still illuminated to be the brightest thing in the photograph, and I think this is a pretty cool dynamic, and so those are the two reasons why I think this photo is really cool and I wanted to include it in this series. Then let's continue with two more photos of me and my parents. Probably always the other parents taking the photo here. So on the left photo is a photograph from my dad, photographing a simple portrait of my mum and me at a lake. I just love the lighting that they chose. Again, I don't know how intentional it was, but obviously they were shooting at the wonderful golden hour light, and I think that is really a positive in this photo. It really looks warm and nice in the photo, and this warmth that is in the photo really emits this sense of nostalgia. I think this photo really is that type of photo that I was expecting to find in these negatives, this very nostalgic photo that you just look at and you feel that nostalgia. I think sunsets always have something very nostalgic, and I think this photo really shows that in a nice way. But apart from that, again, I cropped it to a 4x5 to avoid some negative space, and a little detail that I really like are the birds that are flying in the background. But then when it comes to the composition being more interesting, my mum seems to have had an eye for it, at least in the right photo, which I'm assuming that she took. I think the composition is quite interesting because we've got all sorts of diagonal lines going on here, meaning the lines that you can see from the top left going to the right side of the image. But then the other diagonal line that you have here is just the way that my dad and I are lying in the photo, which is in the perfect 90-degree opposite direction, basically, of the other line, which I think is what makes the photo interesting, at least for me. I feel that this photo has something very geometrical about it in an interesting way. It's actually just a simple snapshot of my dad tiredly holding me and lying on the ground there, but I think my mum actually captured this in a very interesting way, so props to her photographic eye there. And then lastly, I would like to end this series with this page here, which is the one and only page with 3 photos. As I explained in the photograph of the toddlers, the tilted horizon can have very interesting effects on the photograph. Of course, probably they were not intentional, but they sometimes just really add something interesting and something personal and subjective to the photograph. And I think the left photograph on this page really shows that again, because again, as you can see in the background, the image is tilted. And then there's me in the foreground, still in that toddler age. I love the outfit, by the way, that red cape. I'm sure that has a proper name, I sadly don't know it. And with the dog, it's again just quite a random photo. It feels like a snapshot, but I think it goes beyond what a snapshot can do because it really emits this feeling thanks to it being a little messy and chaotic again. I think it sort of puts me into my own self from back then. It sort of pictures this childish action, you know? And I think photographically this has, in that way, nice metaphors again of the tilted image and then the composition just being a little random, a little off, that it doesn't feel very clean in a purposeful way, even though I am absolutely sure that this is a pure coincidence again. But whoever took it, I think this is a wonderful shot. Similarly, the other two photos on this page also have certain aspects to them that add to this sense of childhood action, and that's why I think that these three fit together very nicely, because they all seem sort of dynamic, sort of moving. So the photo on the left is frozen because of the higher shutter speed, but the tilted aspect of it makes it feel like it's in a movement, whereas in the middle photo you can actually see that it's not quite sharp. There's a little bit of motion blur, and also the composition is very moved, I find, because you can't really see where it is. It seems a bit like whoever photographed this just turned to me and shot. And also something that really makes this photo interesting, I think, is the fact that I'm not looking at the camera. It seems a bit like I was unaware of the camera, which just adds to a feeling of authenticity, I think, in the photo. And so that is why I wanted to include this one. And in the right photo, I'm pretty sure that I was aware of the camera. I mean, whoever shot this, my mum or my dad, was right in front of me. But nevertheless, again, I think this photo feels very authentic. It feels real because of the motion blur and the focus that is not quite hit here, and the fact that the swing is up in the height at the moment and not just still. And it's all these little factors that add to this movement in the photo. The photo feels very moving and like action, and that's what I was meaning with the feeling of childhood action, because I think in my childhood I felt a lot like everything is in action, and now I think when you grow older the action sort of not dies down, but it's more controlled, whereas as a child I feel like everything is always action. And so I think these three photos really encompass that in a very nice way. And that's why I wanted to show them to you. But that, I believe, yeah, right, that is the last page. These are the last photos that I wanted to show you. So these were a couple of photos from the 500 that I scanned, those that I thought were worth showing, and I think that could be interesting. Let me know your thoughts. I'm really curious. These are not my photos, as said, these are actually photos from my parents, but I think it's very fun to actually go over these and analyze them. Today I couldn't really tell many behind the scenes stories because, well, I didn't take them, but I still hope that this video was entertaining because I just, as said, find it fascinating to look at these photos that are pretty old, and I'm so happy that I was able to recover these in a digital form now as well. Yeah, and with that said, that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I'd appreciate a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't yet, and I'll see you again next week in the next video. Until then, goodbye.